dowel, and these are little guides to roll the clay out with.
Just like a rolling pin.
Just like
and
a rolling
pastry
pin.
dough.
Oh, so that way you don't get it too thin. Right?
So don't get it too thin, and so you get it even. So that's one quick way to do it. That's about the thickness I would be going for. You don't want to let them roll it out, you know, thin, because you're going to be bending these and working on them. The other way to work on it is to just take that slab and hand press it, which is what I usually wind up doing. Flipping it back and forth and just pressing it all around evenly until it gets down to about the same thickness. So you can do exactly the same thing, and every kid does their own. So then the next step is...
They can do that on the newspaper.
They do it on the newspaper. So you could do everything on the newspaper. You don't have to have the canvas boards. You could just have newspapers, 2 layers. The only thing to watch out for, the clay will start getting the paper wet and it'll stick, so I have them go flip-flop to different sides of the paper or turn the paper over, but they can work directly on the paper. So what I'll say is start with the clay slab and then draw the outline shape of the mask that you're going to make. So if it's a cat, maybe it's going to be more circular. If it's a person, generally you want to do an oval shape, and just to draw the largest oval shape you can make with your slab. And then cut that out by just going over the line.
And where do you get those little sticks?
Grocery store.
Okay.
Skewers, bamboo
Okay.
skewers. And then what I started doing was having them draw like a center line and a top third line. So they can sort of get the proportions of where the features are going to go. Because otherwise I'd have kids putting their eyes up here and the mouth here, and it was like, what's wrong? So I'd say, well, put your eyes about in the top third, and then the nose should be sort of centered in the middle, and then the mouth is in the lower third. Just very lightly to give them a proportion. Then once they have this done, the thickness of the slab, we can bend this, but to support it, I'll take 2 pages of paper and just gently, not fold, but just crumple a ball, and then take the rest of it and tuck it in so I've got sort of the form. If it's too small, I can add another page. If it's too big, I can take one out. But you want this paper form to fit behind the clay so that you can do this and stretch the clay over it. So now you have a dimensional shape that's supported. So whatever they do will work on this and not flatten it down again. And when it's in a classroom, I'll say, okay, take that off there, put your initials on the back, room number, and then if you really get ahead of the game, put a hole about at eye level all the way through from either side, about there, because you're going to wind up with a place to have a hanging picture wall. Then it can go back on this paper form and stay there for almost the rest of the project, for the whole thing, until you get ready to fire it. So it's really easy to carry, they're not going to smash things. All right, so the pieces that I cut off of the shape, now I can look at maybe pushing in and creating an eye socket, maybe doing something for the cheeks, but you can shape the slab before you do the features. And in the features, I try to get them to try different shapes. Like if you're going to do eyes, start with eyeballs, but maybe you try them on, oh, and those are too big. So
like aliens.
Before you do anything permanent, keep going till you get something that you think works. And for the nose, we were doing just a simple roll on the table, but then pushing one end down so it's thicker at one end, and then by just shaping that, start getting a nose that would fit on there. Then the lips were the same thing. If you just started with a long roll and then broke it and tried to pinch the ends together, you could see about where that would go. Maybe like that. We even had a thing where there would be a line here, and that would be for the teeth.
Day of the Dead.
But it really do it this way. Dia de los Muertos thing. The eyebrows were really easy. You could go in there and try different expressions, try different things with those. But we haven't attached anything. These are all loose. And that would come after you've made your selection of what the shapes are going to be. For the hair, we just did a simple patty, sort of like this. I mean, I've had the kids do, some of them will come up and start doing the hairs one at a time, and it takes forever, and then they're super fragile. So what we came up with is just to do a small slab and then try to texture one end of it. And then that way you get the sense of
A Donald Trump.
of hair. And then when you're satisfied sort of with the arrangement, using a little bit of water, you can attach these pieces. The trick is, see, the clay gets wet and it makes a paste. And that paste is called slip. And if you do both surfaces, just a little bit of scratching will do it. It'll
dry on.
It will stick. If you just leave these pieces like this loose, eventually they'll dry, the water goes away, and they just fall apart. So I always would put out a little thing of forks and water and say, did you attach every piece before you went on to painting it? Because otherwise it's going to come apart. So it goes pretty fast, and they can...
So when you teach kids, do you do the whole thing like you're doing now?
Yep. Try to run through the whole thing. So this would be like session 1. Then we could take this whole piece, this whole mask, still on the paper, and put it into a plastic bag. And it would sit for a week, 2 weeks. As long as the bag was closed, the clay would stay soft. Because you want to still have moisture in the clay when you're going to paint on it. So like right now, you could go ahead and paint it. You could do the eyes.
In the wet stage?
Yes, it's actually best to do it in the wet stage.
Wow.
Because that way you can scratch through the colors and do some decoration that way. Now if you were going to change this up, we've done animals. So like for a bird, if you just made a cone-shaped roll on the table and flattened it, then all of a sudden that can become a bill or beak very easily. And this would attach in place of the nose. So you could have a bird. If you're doing a fox or a bear that has to have a muzzle that comes off of the face, I have one over there from another class.
Yeah.
You could just make a cone over your finger and then open this up, and then the muzzle becomes the mouth and the nose.
Cool.
Change it into an animal. You could add the ears. You can just mix and match the pieces. So usually when I have more time, I will do like 2 different animals and a person, and then let the people pick, sort of play around with that. But once you have this on the paper, now you can handle it. It's not going to change shape. You use the colors right out of the bottles. Now these have gotten a little bit dry sitting out here in the sun, but basically you can just start painting those on.
So I never knew that. I thought you had to put the glaze part on when the clay was dry.
Well, that's the beauty of it. This isn't glaze. This is underglaze.
Blender.
So if you think of the underglaze being like a colored clay, it goes on wet clay, dries on the wet clay, gets fired, and then it gets covered with the clear glaze. And the clear glaze is what makes it shiny. But this color can be painted directly on the clay, like this. I'm just going to do a couple things real quick. I'm just going to do half of him because I don't want to take up all your time. So let's say you started this, but the class isn't over and they want to add different colors over that. You can do that. Just have to make sure you clean the brush. So if you're doing like maybe cheetah sort of stripes or something, and then all those stripes will come out perfectly.
Wow.
They won't bleed because they're not a glaze, they're an underglaze. So they'll dry, you'll fire it, and then you put a clear glaze over it. Then the other great thing...
And then you fire it a second time with a clear glaze.
Yes. One more little thing.
Do you ever teach classes to adults? Like doing this, but in a longer space.
I haven't been doing that, but that doesn't mean I wouldn't do that some point in the future, but there's nothing set up presently other than this is like the second round I've done at the Crocker.
And where do you recommend a person take their clay objects once they're finished to be fired if you don't have a kiln?
I have a supply and resource sheet here. Alpha Fired Arts is the first listing. They will actually fire your work for a small fee.
Okay.
And they're the ones that sell all of this. Okay, so let's say I started doing these colors. Because they're underglazes, if I want to show the clay underneath, let me do one of these to show you. This is Sgraffito. Here's my stick.
Your skewer?
Yeah.
So I'm going to use probably throw it on the ground.
Here's a skewer.
I can use that. So you could use the point, and you could do little lines. To scratch through, or you could do bigger lines. So what this gives you is this other texturing and pattern making through the colors, showing the clay underneath. So sometimes we've gotten the red clay, the really dark red clay, and then painted light colors on, and then carved or scratched through those to show the red clay. And sometimes when it looks like that, we don't even put a glaze on it, we just fire it. So what I'd like you to try, if you want, is to just take a slab of clay and either roll it out or patty cake it out on some paper at the tables, and then get your paper set up, do your little design, and just sort of play with it, and I'll come around and help.
Okay, cool. Thank you.